The bathroom tiles blurred beneath my trembling hands as I gasped for air that wouldn't come. My chest felt like someone had wrapped steel bands around my ribs and kept tightening them with each desperate breath I tried to take. The scrub brush slipped from my fingers as I clutched my throat, panic flooding through me like ice water. Dad Walter stormed through the doorway, his face twisted with irritation. "Quit faking it," he snapped, crossing his arms. "We've got work to finish." Aunt Meredith appeared behind him, shaking her head with that familiar look of disgust. "She's just trying to avoid cleaning up again." I collapsed onto the cold bathroom floor, my vision swimming as black spots danced at the edges. The sound of my wheezing filled the small space, but Dad just stood there tapping his foot impatiently. "Come on, Hortense. This dramatic nonsense isn't fooling anyone." Aunt Meredith rolled her eyes and turned toward the hallway. I swear every time there's real work to be done, she pulls something like this. Remember when she couldn't breathe during Thanksgiving prep last year? My fingers clawed at my chest as I tried to force words out, but only strangled gasps emerged. The bathroom walls seemed to close in around me, and I could hear my heartbeat hammering irregularly in my ears. Dad crouched down, not with concern, but with the same exasperation he showed when his truck wouldn't start. "Look at me, Hortense. Stop this performance right now. We have the whole house to clean before your cousins arrive tomorrow, and I'm not dealing with your fake emergencies today." Through the ringing in my ears, I heard Mrs. Patterson's voice from the front door. Our neighbor had been dropping off her famous apple pie when she heard the commotion. "Walter, what's going on in there? That doesn't sound right." "Nothing to worry about, Margaret," Dad called back, but Mrs. Patterson's footsteps approached the bathroom anyway. When she saw me curled on the floor, fighting for each breath, her face went white. "Dear God, call 911 right now," she shouted, pulling out her phone. "Absolutely not," Aunt Meredith snapped, grabbing for Mrs. Patterson's phone. "She does this all the time. You're just encouraging her behavior." But Mrs. Patterson was already dialing. "I don't care what you think this is. This girl needs help immediately." Dad's face flushed red with anger. "Margaret, you're overreacting. Hortense has always been dramatic about everything. Last month she claimed she couldn't catch her breath after climbing the stairs. It's just attention-seeking." The room spun violently as I tried to sit up, my lungs burning with each shallow gasp. Mrs. Patterson knelt beside me, her voice gentle but urgent. "Honey, help is coming. Just try to stay calm." Within 7 minutes, I heard sirens approaching. Dad paced the hallway, muttering about embarrassing situations and unnecessary drama. Aunt Meredith stood with her arms crossed periodically, glancing at her watch and sighing loudly. EMT Jake burst through the front door, his medical bag in hand and determination in his eyes. He took one look at me and immediately dropped to his knees, pulling out his stethoscope. "How long has she been like this?" he asked, pressing the cold metal to my chest. "About 15 minutes of her usual theatrics," Dad replied dismissively. "She always does this when there's work to avoid." Jake's expression darkened as he listened to my irregular heartbeat and labored breathing. He wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my arm, pumping it quickly while watching the gauge with growing concern. "Blood pressure 190/120, he called to his partner. "Oxygen saturation 78%. Heart rate 140 and irregular." He placed a pulse oximeter on my finger and checked his watch, timing something. Suddenly, his entire demeanor shifted from concern to alarmed. "I need a stretcher in here right now," Jake shouted toward the front door. "We've got a cardiac event in progress." The bathroom erupted in chaos. Dad's confident dismissal crumbled as Jake's partner rushed in with emergency equipment. Aunt Meredith backed against the wall, her face pale and confused. "Cardiac event," Dad stammered. "But she's only 28. She can't be having heart problems. She's just being dramatic like always." Jake ignored him, speaking rapidly into his radio. "Dispatch, we need priority transport to Mercy General. Female 28 severe respiratory distress with cardiac involvement. Suspected medical neglect situation." Those last words made Dad's face go white. "Medical neglect. What are you talking about? We take good care of her." "Sir, I need to ask you some questions," Jake said, while placing an oxygen mask over my face. "Does your daughter have a history of respiratory problems?" "Well, she's always complaining about breathing issues, but she exaggerates everything," Dad replied defensively. "Has she been prescribed any medications for asthma or heart conditions?" Dad and Aunt Meredith exchanged a quick glance that didn't go unnoticed by Jake. "She might have had an inhaler at some point," Aunt Meredith said slowly, "but she never really needed it." "Where is that inhaler now?" Jake asked sharply. Dad stumbled over his words. Jake's partner was already searching the house per protocol, calling out medication names and checking dates. "Found something," he shouted from Dad's bedroom. "Emergency rescue inhaler prescribed 6 months ago, still sealed in the package. It's been hidden in a drawer under some bills." Jake's jaw tightened as he looked from the unopened inhaler to Dad's guilty expression. "Sir, withholding prescribed emergency medication from a family member is a serious matter. I'm required to document this situation in my report." As they loaded me onto the stretcher, I caught fragments of Jake's radio communication with the hospital. "Possible domestic neglect situation. Withheld emergency medication. Family displaying dismissive behavior toward patient's distress. Recommend social services consultation." Dad followed the ambulance in his truck, Aunt Meredith beside him, both finally beginning to understand that their years of dismissing my breathing problems as drama were about to become an official investigation. The emergency room at Mercy General buzzed with efficient activity as Dr. Susan Chen examined me with thorough precision. The oxygen mask had helped stabilize my breathing somewhat, but my chest still ached with each breath I managed to draw. "Hortense, I'm going to run some comprehensive tests to understand what's happening with your respiratory and cardiac systems." Dr. Chen explained, her voice calm but serious. "The EMT report raises some concerns that we need to investigate fully." Dad and Aunt Meredith sat in the corner of the room, both unusually quiet. The confident dismissal they'd shown at home had completely evaporated under the bright hospital lights and the steady beeping of monitoring equipment. The blood work results came back within an hour, and Dr. Chen's expression grew more troubled as she studied the numbers. "Hortense, these results show chronic untreated asthma with secondary cardiac complications. Your inflammatory markers are extremely elevated, indicating your body has been fighting respiratory distress for an extended period." She turned to Dad with a questioning look. "Mr. Wilson, has your daughter been receiving regular medical care for her breathing problems?" Dad shifted uncomfortably. "She's seen doctors before. They always said it was just mild asthma, nothing serious." According to her medical records, Hortense was referred to a pulmonologist 8 months ago and a cardiologist 6 months ago. There's no record of her attending either appointment. "Can you explain why?" Aunt Meredith spoke up quickly. "She's always been afraid of doctors. We couldn't force her to go if she didn't want to." But Dr. Chen wasn't satisfied. She pulled up more records on her computer screen. "I'm seeing multiple missed specialist appointments, declined recommended treatments, and refused diagnostic tests. Yet the emergency inhaler prescription was filled, but apparently never used." The chest x-rays revealed even more disturbing evidence. Dr. Chen pointed to shadowy areas on the films. This scarring pattern is consistent with repeated, untreated respiratory episodes. Hortense, how many times have you experienced breathing difficulties like today's episode? I thought back through the fog of oxygen deprivation. At least once a month for the past 2 years, sometimes more often. And what happened during those episodes? My family said I was being dramatic. They told me to calm down and stop seeking attention. Dr. Chen's lips pressed into a thin line. A social worker named Patricia knocked on the door and entered with a clipboard and serious expression. I'm here following the EMT's report about possible medical neglect, Patricia said, introducing herself to everyone in the room. I need to ask some questions about Hortense's medical history and care. Dad immediately became defensive. Look, we've always done our best for her. Money's been tight and we can't afford every specialist visit and expensive medication. Patricia made notes as he spoke. I understand financial constraints can be challenging. What insurance coverage does Hortense have? She's covered under my plan from the construction company. It's pretty good coverage, actually. Then cost shouldn't have been a barrier to specialist care, Patricia observed. Let me check something. She left the room and returned 20 minutes later with a thick folder. I've been reviewing Hortense's insurance claims and payment records. Her coverage includes full specialist care with minimal copays. In fact, the insurance company shows multiple approved referrals that were never scheduled. Aunt Meredith's face reddened. Well, Hortense is an adult. She's responsible for making her own appointments. Actually, Patricia continued, the records show that someone has been calling to cancel these appointments on her behalf. The phone number on file matches your home number, Mr. Wilson. Dad's confident facade cracked completely. Sometimes she gets overwhelmed by medical appointments. I was just trying to help manage her stress. By preventing her from receiving necessary medical care, Dr. Chen interjected. Patricia consulted her notes again. There's something else troubling here. I've found records of multiple insurance claims for emergency room visits over the past 3 years. According to the documentation, these visits were for breathing difficulties that family members insisted were anxiety attacks or attention-seeking behavior. My head spun as I realized the pattern. Every time I'd struggled to breathe, every time I'd begged for help, every time I'd felt like I was drowning in my own chest, my family had convinced medical staff that I was being dramatic. Dr. Robert Martinez, the cardiologist, arrived to review my heart function. After examining me and studying the test results, his expression was grim. Hortense, your heart has been working overtime, trying to compensate for chronic oxygen deprivation. The strain could have resulted in permanent damage or even sudden cardiac arrest if this had continued untreated. He turned to address Dad and Aunt Meredith directly. This young woman could have died tonight. The respiratory distress she experienced was life-threatening, not imaginary. Patricia continued her investigation, discovering insurance records that painted an even more disturbing picture. Mr. Wilson, I need you to explain why your insurance shows claims for multiple specialist consultations and emergency medications that were apparently never provided to Hortense. Dad's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. The insurance representative I spoke with confirmed that benefits were paid for a pulmonary function test, 2 cardiology consultations, and several prescription medications, including emergency inhalers and cardiac monitoring devices. None of these items appear to have reached Hortense. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of my heart monitor. Dr. Chen stepped closer to my bedside. Hortense, I need to ask you directly. Have you received any specialized medical care for your breathing problems in the past year? No, I whispered through the oxygen mask. Every time I mentioned having trouble breathing, my family said I was being overdramatic and needed to toughen up. Patricia made more notes, her expression increasingly concerned. I'm required to report this situation to Adult Protective Services. The pattern of withheld medical care, along with the insurance discrepancies, suggests financial and medical abuse of a vulnerable adult. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. As Patricia dug deeper into the financial records, she discovered something that would change everything I thought I knew about my family's motivations. Mr. Wilson, she said, her voice taking on a sharper edge, I need you to explain why there's a $25,000 medical trust fund in Hortense's name that she apparently doesn't know about. The silence in the hospital room was deafening as Patricia's words hung in the air. I stared at Dad through the clear plastic of my oxygen mask, searching his face for any sign of surprise, but found only guilt. A trust fund, I managed to whisper. What trust fund? Patricia consulted her paperwork with grim determination. According to the documents I've obtained, your mother Elizabeth established this fund specifically for your ongoing medical care before her death 5 years ago. The original amount was $25,000 designated exclusively for respiratory and cardiac treatment. Aunt Meredith's hands trembled as she gripped the arms of her chair. Dad stood frozen, his face cycling through denial, anger, and defeat. That fund was depleted due to legitimate medical expenses, Dad said weakly, but his voice lacked conviction. Actually, Mr. Wilson, the bank records tell a different story. Patricia spread several documents across the bedside table. I've traced every withdrawal from this account over the past 5 years. Would you like me to read them aloud? Dr. Chen observed the family dynamics with growing alarm while monitoring my heart rate, which had spiked again as the betrayal unfolded. Patricia began reading from the bank statements. March of last year, $4,000 withdrawn for emergency medical transport, but there's no record of any ambulance bill or medical emergency that month. Dad's jaw tightened. There were expenses you don't know about. June of last year, $6,000 for specialized respiratory equipment. Yet Hortense has never received any respiratory equipment beyond the basic inhaler that was left unopened. My chest ached with more than just physical pain. Each withdrawal Patricia read felt like another betrayal, another layer of lies peeling away. September $3,500 for cardiac monitoring devices. October $2,500 for pulmonary rehabilitation. November $4,000 for emergency medication supplies. Patricia looked up from the papers. Mr. Wilson, where are these medical devices and medications? Some treatments don't leave physical evidence, Aunt Meredith interjected desperately. There are consultation fees, diagnostic procedures. That's interesting, Patricia replied, because I also have Mr. Wilson's personal bank records here obtained through the insurance fraud investigation. Would you like to know what was deposited into his personal account on the same days these medical withdrawals were made? The monitoring equipment began beeping more rapidly as my stress levels climbed. Dr. Chen adjusted my oxygen flow and spoke quietly to the nursing staff. March 23rd, $4,500 deposited into Walter Wilson's personal account same day as the medical transport withdrawal. The deposit memo reads, truck payment. Dad's face crumbled. You don't understand the pressure I was under. The construction work was slow, bills were piling up. June 15th, $6,000 deposited memo reads, vacation fund. September 10th, $3,500 memo reads, home improvement. I closed my eyes, trying to process the magnitude of the theft. My mother had tried to protect me, even after her death, and my own father had stolen her gift. Patricia wasn't finished. But the most disturbing discovery is this: Mr. Wilson has been receiving monthly disability payments on Hortense's behalf for uncontrolled respiratory condition, totaling $800 per month for the past 18 months. Disability payments? I gasped. I never applied for disability. No, but someone did, using medical documentation that claimed your condition was severe and unmanageable. The irony is that this same condition could have been easily controlled with proper treatment funded by the trust account. Dr. Chen stepped forward, her voice sharp with professional anger. Let me understand this correctly. You've been collecting disability payments for a condition that you deliberately kept untreated by withholding prescribed medications and preventing specialist care. It's not that simple, Aunt Meredith protested. Hortense has always been difficult about medical treatment. She doesn't like doctors. Actually, a new voice said from the doorway, I have documentation that suggests otherwise. Attorney Gregory Williams entered the room carrying a leather briefcase and wearing an expression of controlled fury. I'd never seen him before, but he seemed to know exactly who everyone was. Mr. Williams, Patricia said with obvious relief, thank you for coming so quickly. I've been trying to reach Hortense for 8 months, the attorney said, setting his briefcase on a nearby chair. Every time I called the house, I was told she was too ill to speak, or having a medical episode. Dad stepped forward defensively. She has been ill. That's why we've been managing her affairs for her. Managing her affairs. Mr. Williams opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Mr. Wilson, you obtained power of attorney over Hortense's medical and financial decisions by submitting fraudulent medical documentation claiming she was mentally incompetent due to oxygen deprivation. My world tilted on its axis. Power of attorney, I never agreed to that. According to the paperwork your father filed, you were in such severe medical distress that you couldn't make rational decisions about your own care. He claimed you were suffering from cognitive impairment due to chronic, untreated asthma. Aunt Meredith's face went white. Walter, you said those papers were just for insurance purposes. I was protecting her, Dad shouted, his composure finally breaking completely. She doesn't understand financial matters. The money was just sitting there while we had real expenses to deal with. The money was sitting there waiting for her to need medical care, Mr. Williams said coldly, which she obviously did repeatedly but was prevented from accessing. Dr. Chen had heard enough. I'm documenting all of this in Hortense's medical record. This level of medical neglect, combined with financial fraud, represents a clear pattern of abuse. Patricia nodded grimly. I'm immediately filing for emergency protective services. Hortense, you have the right to revoke any power of attorney that was obtained fraudulently. But Mr. Williams had one more revelation that would prove the scope of the betrayal was even worse than we'd discovered. There's something else, he said, pulling out a video camera. Mr. Wilson, I believe you've been secretly recording Hortense during her medical episodes. I found this hidden in her bedroom when I conducted a welfare check last week with Adult Protective Services. The camera contained hours of footage showing me struggling to breathe while Dad and Aunt Meredith stood nearby, dismissing my distress and occasionally making mocking comments about my dramatic performances. They were planning to use this footage to prove I was faking, I realized with horror, to make the power of attorney permanent. Exactly, Mr. Williams confirmed. The plan was to have you declared permanently incompetent so they could access the remainder of the trust fund and continue collecting disability payments indefinitely. As the full scope of their betrayal became clear, I felt something shift inside me. The desperate, gasping girl who had collapsed on the bathroom floor was transforming into someone who refused to be a victim any longer. It was time to fight back. Dr. Amanda Foster, the hospital's psychologist specializing in family abuse, arrived the next morning with a gentle demeanor but penetrating questions. As I sat up in bed, finally breathing normally, thanks to proper medication, she helped me piece together a lifetime of manipulation I'd been too close to see. Hortense, I'd like to talk about your relationship with your family regarding your health. Can you tell me about the first time you remember having breathing problems? I thought back, my mind now, clear without the constant fog of oxygen deprivation. I was maybe 8 years old. We were playing in the backyard, and I couldn't catch my breath after running. I was scared and told my mom. What happened then? Mom wanted to take me to the doctor, but Dad said I was just out of shape and needed to toughen up. He made me run laps around the house until I collapsed. Dr. Foster made notes without judgment. And after your mother passed away 5 years ago, the breathing episodes got worse, but whenever I mentioned them, Dad would get angry. He'd say I was dishonoring Mom's memory by being weak when she had fought so hard against cancer. Patricia, who had returned with more documentation, joined our conversation. Hortense, I've been interviewing your neighbors and former co-workers. The pattern of isolation and control goes much deeper than medical neglect. She opened a new folder. Your high school friend Emma contacted me after seeing the news report about your hospitalization. She said your family convinced you to drop out of college after your sophomore year, claiming you needed to come home for health reasons. I nodded slowly. Dad said the stress of school was making my breathing worse. He convinced me that staying home was the smart choice. But Emma remembers you were thriving academically and socially at college. Your breathing problems only seemed to worsen after you moved back home. Dr. Foster leaned forward. This is consistent with medical gaslighting. Your family created an environment where your symptoms were both dismissed as fake and used as justification for controlling your life. There's more, Patricia continued. I spoke with your former manager at the bookstore where you worked 3 years ago. She said you were an excellent employee, but your family frequently called in sick for you, claiming you were having respiratory episodes. Eventually, they convinced her to let you go because you were unreliable. I loved that job, I whispered. I never called in sick. They told me the manager complained about my attendance. Actually, she wanted to promote you to assistant manager. Your family sabotaged that opportunity by claiming your health couldn't handle additional responsibility. Dr. Foster explained the psychological pattern. Abusers often isolate their victims from employment, education, and social connections. This makes the victim financially dependent and less likely to seek outside help. What about dating? She asked gently. Have you had romantic relationships? I thought about Marcus, the kind man I'd met at the library 2 years ago. There was someone, but it didn't work out. My family said he was just trying to take advantage of me because of my health problems. Patricia consulted her notes. Marcus Thompson, I spoke with him yesterday. He said he was very concerned about your health, but every time he suggested you see a doctor or tried to drive you to medical appointments, your family interfered. They told him I was too fragile for a serious relationship, she continued. He eventually stopped calling because he felt like your family was sabotaging any chance you had at independence. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Every opportunity for friendship, career advancement, education, or love had been systematically destroyed by the people who claimed to be protecting me. Dr. Foster, there's something else troubling, Patricia said. The Social Security Administration has confirmed that Hortense has been receiving disability benefits for 18 months, but she's never seen any of that money. Where has it been going? I asked. Directly into your father's account. He's been listed as your representative payee, claiming you're incapable of managing finances due to medical incapacity. Dr. Foster shook her head. This is textbook vulnerable adult exploitation. They've created a narrative where you're simultaneously too sick to function independently, but also faking your symptoms when it's inconvenient for them. The medical records I've obtained paint a clear picture, Patricia added. Every emergency room visit shows the same pattern. You arrive in genuine distress, but your family convinces medical staff that you're being dramatic. The doctors wanting to respect family input provide minimal treatment and discharge you quickly. But there were doctors who recommended specialists. I protested. I remember Dad saying they wanted to run expensive tests. Yes, and those specialists could have identified the pattern of neglect much earlier. That's why your father systematically prevented you from seeing them. Dr. Foster helped me understand the psychological impact. Hortense, you've been conditioned to doubt your own physical sensations. When someone repeatedly tells you that your pain isn't real, you start to believe them even when your body is screaming for help. I did start to wonder if I was being dramatic, I admitted. Sometimes I'd feel like I couldn't breathe, but when they'd get angry about it, I'd try to convince myself it wasn't that bad. That's not your fault, Dr. Foster said firmly. That's the result of systematic psychological abuse designed to make you question your own reality. Patricia had one more devastating revelation. Hortense, I need to tell you about your father's elderly father, your grandfather Harold. I looked up sharply. Grandpa Harold died 2 years ago. Dad said it was a sudden heart attack. Actually, the death certificate lists complications from untreated diabetes and respiratory failure. The nursing home where he lived documented multiple complaints about Walter Wilson preventing medical care and managing his father's finances inappropriately. My blood ran cold. He did this to Grandpa, too. The pattern is identical. Your grandfather had a Social Security pension and small savings account. Walter convinced the nursing home that his father was experiencing dementia and couldn't make medical decisions. He then systematically withdrew funds designated for medical care while preventing treatment that could have extended his father's life. Dr. Foster's expression was grave. Hortense, you weren't your father's first victim. This appears to be a deliberate pattern of exploiting vulnerable family members for financial gain. But why? I asked, my voice breaking. Why would he do this to people he's supposed to love? Financial abuse often escalates gradually, Dr. Foster explained. It might have started with small boundary violations, then grew as he realized how much control he could exert and how much money was available. Patricia stood up, her expression determined. The good news is that this pattern of behavior has left a clear evidence trail. We now have documentation spanning multiple victims and several years. That's going to be crucial for the criminal investigation. Criminal investigation, I echoed. Hortense, what's been done to you and your grandfather constitutes federal crimes. Medicare fraud, disability fraud, vulnerable adult abuse, theft of designated medical funds. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit is already building a case. As I absorbed the scope of the betrayal, I felt a spark of something I hadn't experienced in years. Not despair or confusion, but anger. Pure, righteous anger at having my life stolen from me piece by piece. It was time to take my life back. The next morning, I sat across from attorney Gregory Williams in the hospital's Patient Advocacy Center, finally understanding the full extent of my rights and options. My breathing was clear for the first time in years, thanks to proper medication and treatment. Hortense, I want you to know that everything done to you was illegal and you have multiple avenues for seeking justice, Mr. Williams explained. But I need you to understand that fighting back will require strength and determination. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my mother's trust fund stolen piece by piece, about Grandpa Harold dying alone while his son profited from his suffering. about all the jobs I'd lost, relationships destroyed, and opportunities stolen. I'm ready, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. Excellent. First, we're filing an emergency petition to revoke the fraudulent power of attorney. I've already prepared the paperwork documenting how it was obtained through false medical claims. Patricia joined us with a stack of new evidence. The Adult Protective Services investigation has uncovered additional victims. Your father's pattern goes back even further than we initially discovered. She opened a thick file. We found records of 3 elderly relatives who died under suspicious circumstances over the past 10 years. Each one had Walter listed as a financial representative or caregiver, and each one experienced sudden medical complications after their savings accounts were depleted. Mr. Williams reviewed the documents with growing anger. This constitutes a pattern of serial financial and medical abuse. The district attorney is very interested in this case. Dr. Martinez stopped by with my latest test results. Hortense, I have good news. With proper medication and treatment, your heart function is already improving significantly. The damage from years of untreated respiratory stress is largely reversible. How long should I have been getting this treatment? I asked. Based on your symptoms and medical history, you should have been on daily maintenance medications 5 years ago. The episodes you suffered could have been completely prevented with a $15 per month prescription. The waste of it all made me even more determined. Mr. Williams had been busy building our case. I've subpoenaed all of your father's financial records, including his personal accounts, the truck loan, vacation expenses, and gambling activity. Gambling. Oh yes, Walter Wilson has a significant gambling problem. Most of your medical fund went to pay off debts to local casinos and online poker sites. Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor who had called for help, arrived with more support than I'd expected. Hortense, honey, I brought some people who want to help you. Behind her stood Sarah, my former college roommate, along with Emma from high school and Marcus, the man my family had driven away. We've all been worried about you for years, Sarah said, hugging me carefully. When we heard what really happened, we had to come. Marcus stepped forward hesitantly. Hortense, I'm sorry I didn't fight harder to help you. Your family convinced me that trying to get you medical care would stress you out and make things worse. They were very convincing, I replied. I believe them too. Sarah had brought documentation from our college years. I kept all your emails from sophomore year. You were so excited about your classes and your plans for graduate school. Then suddenly you disappeared, and when I tried to contact you, your father said you'd had a nervous breakdown. A nervous breakdown? He claimed you were hospitalized for severe anxiety and couldn't handle academic stress. I wanted to visit, but he said doctors had ordered complete isolation from college friends to avoid triggers. Emma nodded grimly. Same thing happened to me in high school. Every time I invited you somewhere, your family said you were too sick to go out. I finally stopped calling because I thought I was bothering you during a chronic illness. Mr. Williams was taking notes. This testimony will be crucial for establishing the pattern of isolation and control. We're building a comprehensive case that shows deliberate medical neglect combined with financial exploitation. Patricia had more updates from the investigation. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit has frozen all of Walter's assets pending criminal charges. They've also discovered that he's been filing false insurance claims on your behalf for years. What kind of false claims? Medical equipment therapy sessions, specialist consultations. He's been billing insurance companies for treatments you never received, then pocketing the reimbursements. The scope of the fraud was staggering. Mr. Williams outlined our strategy. We're pursuing both criminal charges and civil recovery. The criminal case will seek imprisonment for your father and restitution for all stolen funds. The civil case will recover damages for pain and suffering lost opportunities and punitive damages. But I want more than just money, so I said. I want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say, Patricia smiled. Would you be willing to work with Adult Protective Services to help identify other vulnerable adults who might be experiencing similar abuse? Absolutely. Dr. Foster had been developing a longer-term plan. Hortense, you've shown remarkable resilience through years of systematic abuse. I think you could be a powerful advocate for other medical abuse victims. Over the following days, our case gained momentum rapidly. The local news picked up the story, and the FBI investigation expanded as more evidence emerged. Agent Michael Torres from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit explained the scope of their findings. Mr. Wilson's activities constitute a multi-year criminal enterprise targeting vulnerable family members. We've identified at least 6 victims and over $200,000 in fraudulent insurance claims and stolen funds. $200,000. Your medical trust was just one source. We found systematic theft from your grandfather's pension, fraudulent disability claims for multiple relatives, and a complex insurance fraud scheme involving fake medical equipment purchases. The day of the arraignment, I sat in the courthouse surrounded by my newfound support system. Dad and Aunt Meredith were led in, wearing handcuffs, their confident superiority replaced by humiliation and fear. Judge Patricia Thompson reviewed the charges with stern disapproval. Mr. Wilson, you're charged with 17 felony counts, including vulnerable adult abuse, medical neglect, resulting in bodily harm insurance, fraud, disability fraud, and theft of designated medical funds. Bail is set at $50,000. Aunt Meredith's charges were equally serious. As accessories to fraud and conspiracy, she faced 3 years in prison. But the most satisfying moment came when Mr. Williams stood to address the court. Your Honor, the victim in this case wishes to make a statement. I approached the podium on steady legs, breathing clearly for the first time in years. Your Honor, my father and aunt stole more than money from me. They stole my health, my education, my career opportunities, and years of my life. But most importantly, they taught me that I'm stronger than I knew. Today, I'm not just seeking justice for myself, but for my grandfather and all the other vulnerable people who were victimized by this systematic abuse. I want to dedicate my life to preventing others from experiencing what we endured. Judge Thompson nodded approvingly. Miss Wilson, your courage in coming forward has likely saved other lives. I'm ordering a full investigation into all financial activities related to the defendant's care of elderly and disabled family members. As Dad and Aunt Meredith were led away to await trial, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, hope for the future. 6 months later, I sat in the packed courthouse as the culmination of our fight for justice began. The federal prosecutor had built an ironclad case with evidence spanning nearly a decade of systematic abuse targeting vulnerable family members. The prosecution calls Hortense Wilson to the stand, announced Assistant District Attorney Carolyn Matthews, a sharp woman who specialized in elder abuse and vulnerable adult crimes. As I walked to the witness stand, I caught sight of Dad at the defendant's table. He looked smaller, somehow diminished by the weight of evidence against him. Aunt Meredith sat beside him, her former confidence replaced by resignation. Miss Wilson, please tell the court about the medical care you received while under your father's guardianship. Ada Matthews began. I spoke clearly, my voice strong, thanks to months of proper treatment. For 5 years, I was prevented from receiving basic medical care for asthma and heart problems. Every time I struggled to breathe, my father told me I was being dramatic and seeking attention. What was the impact of this untreated condition? I collapsed regularly, couldn't work, steadily, lost educational opportunities, and lived in constant fear that I was dying. Meanwhile, my father was stealing money designated for my medical care and collecting disability benefits on my behalf. The defense attorney, a tired-looking public defender, tried to create doubt. "Miss Wilson, isn't it possible your father was simply overwhelmed by your medical needs and made some poor financial decisions under stress?" "No," I replied firmly. "The evidence shows he systematically exploited not just me, but my grandfather and other elderly relatives. This wasn't overwhelm. It was calculated financial abuse." Agent Torres testified about the scope of the investigation. "We discovered a multi-year pattern targeting at least 8 vulnerable family members. Mr. Wilson obtained power of attorney through fraudulent medical documentation, then systematically stole designated medical funds while preventing actual medical care." What was the total financial impact? Over $350,000 in stolen funds, fraudulent insurance claims, and wrongfully obtained government benefits. The medical testimony was particularly damning. Dr. Martinez explained how my untreated condition could have killed me. Miss Wilson was in the early stages of heart failure when she was finally brought to the hospital. Without intervention, she had perhaps 6 months to live. And this condition was easily treatable. With basic asthma medication costing $15 per month and regular checkups, Miss Wilson would have been completely healthy and functional throughout this entire period. Mrs. Patterson testified about what she'd observed over the years. "I watched that girl struggle and gasp for breath while her family stood around discussing what chores she needed to finish. I called 911 because I could see she was dying, and they were worried about embarrassment in front of neighbors." Sarah, my former college roommate, described the systematic isolation. Hortense was thriving academically and socially when her father convinced her to drop out for health reasons. Every time I tried to maintain contact, I was told she was too sick for visitors or phone calls. Marcus testified about the romantic relationship that had been sabotaged. "I loved Hortense and wanted to help her get proper medical care. Her family convinced me that my concern was stressing her out and making her sicker. I regret not fighting harder to help her." The most devastating testimony came from the nursing home administrator who had cared for Grandpa Harold. Mr. Wilson repeatedly refused recommended medical treatments for his father, claiming they were unnecessary expenses. He withdrew funds designated for medical care, while telling us the family couldn't afford proper treatment. What was the result? Harold Wilson died from complications that were entirely preventable with appropriate medical intervention. His son essentially chose his father's death over spending money on health care. When Dad took the stand in his own defense, his testimony was a disaster. Under cross-examination, he crumbled completely. "Mr. Wilson, you testified that you were protecting your daughter from medical expenses your family couldn't afford. How do you explain the $40,000 truck you purchased using her medical trust fund?" "I needed reliable transportation to work. I was supporting the whole family." "And the $18,000 vacation to Las Vegas. Everyone needs relaxation. The stress of caring for Hortense was overwhelming. The stress of preventing her from receiving medical care." Dad's attorney objected, but the damage was done. The jury had seen the evident systematic theft disguised as caregiving, with vulnerable family members suffering, while Dad lived comfortably on stolen funds. Aunt Meredith's testimony revealed her role as an enabler and co-conspirator. "I knew Walter was taking money from the medical account, but I thought he was using it for legitimate family expenses." "Did you help cancel Hortense's medical appointments?" "Sometimes. Walter said the doctors were trying to run up unnecessary bills. Did you witness episodes where Hortense was struggling to breathe? Yes, but she'd always been dramatic about medical issues since childhood. Even when EMTs determined she was having a cardiac event, Aunt Meredith had no answer. The case against them was overwhelming. Phone records showed deliberate appointment cancellations. Bank records revealed the exact flow of stolen money. Medical experts confirmed the preventable nature of my suffering. Insurance investigators documented years of fraudulent claims. During closing arguments, ADA Matthews painted a clear picture. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the defendants didn't just steal money. They stole years of this young woman's life. They kept her sick, isolated, and dependent while profiting from her suffering. Walter Wilson turned vulnerable family members into cash sources, preventing medical care while collecting benefits for their untreated conditions. This wasn't neglect or poor judgment. It was calculated cruelty for financial gain. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours. Guilty on all counts, the foreman announced. Judge Thompson's sentencing was swift and severe. Mr. Wilson, your crimes represent some of the most callous exploitation I've encountered. You systematically abused people who trusted you, turning their suffering into your profit. I sentence you to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You will pay full restitution of $350,000 plus punitive damages. Aunt Meredith received 4 years probation and community service, with requirements to attend counseling about enabling abuse. Furthermore, Judge Thompson continued, I'm ordering the creation of a task force to investigate similar abuse patterns in our community. Miss Wilson's courage in coming forward has likely prevented countless other victims. As the gavel fell, I felt a profound sense of closure. Justice hadn't just been served. It had been comprehensive and meaningful. After the sentencing, Walter's brother David approached me with tears in his eyes. Hortense, I suspected something was wrong, but was afraid to speak up. I'm ashamed I didn't protect you or your grandfather. It's not too late to help others, I replied. There's still work to be done. David nodded solemnly. I want to help with that task force. I know other families who might be experiencing similar situations. As we left the courthouse surrounded by supporters who had become my chosen family, I realized this wasn't just the end of my ordeal. It was the beginning of my life's work. The scared, gasping girl who had collapsed on a bathroom floor was gone forever. In her place stood a woman determined to ensure no one else would suffer what I had endured. 1 year after the trial, I stood before a packed auditorium at the National Conference on Vulnerable Adult Protection, sharing my story with medical professionals, social workers, and advocates from across the country. My breathing was strong and clear, my voice confident as I addressed the crowd. Medical abuse often hides behind the facade of family caregiving. I explained to the attentive audience. The people who are supposed to protect us can become our greatest threat when financial incentives align with their control over our medical decisions. In the front row sat Patricia, now promoted to head the state's Vulnerable Adult Protection Division. Beside her, Dr. Chen and Dr. Martinez smiled with pride at my transformation from patient to advocate. The past year had been a journey of healing and purpose. My trust fund, recovered in full, with interest and punitive damages, had become the foundation for the Harold and Elizabeth Wilson Foundation for Medical Advocacy. The organization provided emergency medical intervention for vulnerable adults and trained healthcare professionals to recognize abuse patterns. Hortense has become one of our most effective advocates, Patricia told reporters after my presentation. Her insights into the psychology of medical abuse have helped us develop new protocols that have already saved lives. My personal healing had been equally remarkable. With proper medical treatment, my respiratory and cardiac health had completely normalized. Dr. Martinez regularly showcased my case as proof that early intervention in vulnerable adult abuse could reverse years of medical damage. "She's a medical miracle," he often said, "not because of any extraordinary treatment, but because we finally removed the barriers to basic health care." The social connections I'd been denied for years had flourished beyond my wildest expectations. Sarah had become my closest friend again, and our monthly coffee dates were filled with laughter and plans for the future. Marcus and I had cautiously resumed dating, building a relationship based on mutual support and respect. "I'm amazed by your strength," Marcus told me over dinner at our favorite restaurant. "You took the worst possible situation and transformed it into something that helps other people." Even more satisfying was the impact our case had created within the justice system. The task force Judge Thompson ordered had identified 43 additional cases of family medical abuse in our county alone. The protocols we developed were being implemented in hospitals nationwide. Agent Torres visited regularly to update me on the continuing investigation. "Your father's case has led to the largest vulnerable adult abuse prosecution in state history. We've recovered over $2 million in stolen funds and prevented an estimated 50 deaths through early intervention." The most unexpected development had been Walter's transformation in prison. 6 months into his sentence, he'd begun participating in a rehabilitation program focused on understanding the impact of financial abuse. "He's written you several letters," his rehabilitation counselor informed me during a victim offender mediation session I'd volunteered for. "He's not asking for forgiveness, but he wants you to know he finally understands what he stole from you." I'd chosen to read one of his letters. "Hortense, I know I have no right to contact you, but I need you to understand something. I convinced myself I was protecting you, but I was really protecting my own selfishness. I stole your health, your future, and your right to trust the people who should have loved you most. You didn't just survive what I did to you. You used it to save other people. That's the kind of person your mother raised you to be, despite everything I tried to destroy." Reading his words, I felt something unexpected, not forgiveness exactly, but a sense of closure that allowed me to fully embrace my new life. David Walter's brother had become an unexpected ally in our advocacy work. His guilt over not protecting me had transformed into determined action. He joined our foundation's board and personally funded a program providing emergency medical interventions for isolated elderly adults. "I can't change what I didn't do for you and Harold," he told me, "but I can make sure other families don't experience what ours did." Aunt Meredith had completed her probation requirements and attended months of counseling about enabling abuse. Our relationship remained strained, but she'd made genuine efforts to understand her role in my suffering. "I told myself I was being loyal to Walter," she admitted during one of our supervised family therapy sessions. "But loyalty to an abuser isn't loyalty. It's complicity. I failed you when you needed protection most." The professional opportunities that had emerged from my advocacy work exceeded anything I could have imagined during my years of isolation. I'd completed my college degree through an accelerated program, graduated with honors, and been accepted to graduate school for social work with a specialization in medical advocacy. "Your lived experience combined with professional training will make you incredibly effective," my graduate advisor explained. "You understand both the victim's perspective and the systemic changes needed to prevent abuse." My speaking engagements had taken me across the country, sharing my story with medical conferences, social service organizations, and legislative committees working on vulnerable adult protection laws. The Hortense Wilson Medical Advocacy Act, as several states had named their new legislation, required mandatory reporting of suspected medical abuse and created penalties for healthcare providers who failed to investigate family interference with medical care. But perhaps the most meaningful aspect of my new life was the daily work with individual victims. Through our foundation's hotline, I spoke regularly with people experiencing medical abuse, helping them navigate the complex systems needed to escape their situations. Your story gave me hope, a woman named Jennifer told me during one of our calls. I thought I was crazy for thinking my husband was deliberately keeping me sick. Hearing that you survived and fought back made me realize I could too. Jennifer's case became one of our most significant successes. Her husband had been preventing her from receiving treatment for diabetes while collecting disability benefits on her behalf. Our intervention saved her life and led to his prosecution. The foundation's work had expanded to include research policy advocacy and direct victim services. We'd helped over 300 vulnerable adults escape medical abuse situations and recovered more than $8 million in stolen medical funds. What started as one woman's fight for justice has become a national movement, Patricia often said when introducing me at conferences. Hortense proved that victims can become the most powerful advocates for systemic change. As I sat in my apartment one evening, reading thank you letters from people our foundation had helped, I reflected on the journey from that terrifying moment on the bathroom floor to this life of purpose and healing. My phone rang, displaying a number from our emergency hotline. Medical Advocacy Foundation, this is Hortense. Please help me, a frightened voice whispered. I think my family is keeping me sick on purpose. I don't know what to do. You've taken the hardest step by calling, I replied, already reaching for my case management folder. Tell me your name and let's figure out how to keep you safe. As I began gathering information for another potential rescue, I smiled with deep satisfaction. The girl who had once gasped for breath while her family profited from her suffering was now the voice offering hope to others trapped in similar situations. I'd learned that advocating for your own health isn't selfish or dramatic. When people dismiss your pain or try to control your medical care, that's not love, it's abuse. Real family supports your healing, doesn't profit from your suffering. Speaking up saved not just my life, but helped protect other vulnerable people from similar betrayal. Your health and well-being matter regardless of what anyone else says. Sometimes the people closest to us can become our greatest danger, but surviving that betrayal can transform you into someone capable of protecting others. Have you ever experienced someone dismissing your health concerns or interfering with your medical care? Have you witnessed situations where vulnerable family members weren't receiving appropriate health care? Your observations and experiences matter because recognizing these patterns can save lives. I'm grateful you listened to my story today, and I hope it empowers you to trust your instincts about your health and speak up when something doesn't feel right. Please like this story. If it resonated with you, subscribe to hear more stories of survival and justice, and share this with anyone who might need to hear that their health concerns are valid and worthy of proper care. Thank you for joining me on this journey from victim to advocate. Remember, your voice and your health matter more than anyone else's convenience or financial interests.